A doe was born in a specific yard, in a specific location, under a specific tree or in a specific thicket. The doe's mother chose that location to give birth because it was safe, because it was hidden, because it was familiar to the mother. And the fawn, the young doe, was born in that place. Years pass, many years, the doe grows, she wanders. She establishes her own territory. She has her own fawns in different yards, different locations, different thickets far from where she was born. Decades pass. And then one day, the doe that is now old, the doe that should have forgotten, that should have moved on, that should have completely severed her connection to the place of her birth, returns. She returns to the exact yard where she was born. Not approximately, not to a similar location, to the exact place. She recognizes it, she knows it, she remembers it. And she will return to that location for the rest of her life. This is not accident. This is not random wandering. This is the activation of a memory that has been encoded for decades. This is a deer coming home. Tonight you are going to understand what a deer never forgets about the yard where she was born, and why that memory persists for the entire span of her life. Welcome back to Hidden Backyard Wildlife, the channel where we sit with the small wild lives that share our yards and try to understand what they understand about the world. If you are new here, make sure you subscribe before this video is over, because what you are about to learn is going to change the way you think about animal memory. Because you will finally understand that deer do not just remember places. Deer carry the memory of home with them for their entire lives. And the yard where a deer was born becomes not just a location, but a destination she will return to across decades of living. Today we are walking through 8 things deer never forget about the yards where they were born. What each of those things reveals about the extraordinary persistence of animal memory. What researchers have discovered about natal site fidelity in deer. And why a deer that has spent decades away from the place of her birth will recognize it immediately upon return, and will reorganize her life around returning to that location repeatedly. Stay with me from beginning to end, because revelation number 6 is the one that explains the neurobiological basis of natal site memory, and revelation number 8 is the one that will make you understand that for a deer, home is not metaphorical. Home is a place she was born. Home is a place she remembers. Home is a place she will return to. And that return is not just a behavioral pattern. That return is a coming home. The memory is decades deep. The return is inevitable. The home is not forgotten. The first thing a deer never forgets is the specific location where she was born. This is not a vague memory. This is not a general sense of the region. This is the specific place. The exact spot under the oak tree where her mother gave birth. The particular thicket where the mother had hidden the newborn fawn. The specific den or shelter location where the fawn spent her first vulnerable days. The fawn's brain is recording this location with extraordinary precision. The newborn deer is encoding not just that she was born in a location, but the specific sensory information about that location. The scent, the light quality, the sounds, the vegetation patterns, the landscape features. The fawn is learning the geography of her birthplace at the most fundamental level of perception and memory encoding. As the fawn grows and becomes mobile, she is repeatedly exposed to this location. The mother returns to the natal site. The fawn's memories of the location are reinforced through repeated experience. The birthplace becomes not just a location where she was born, but a location that is actively significant in her early life. Researchers studying natal site fidelity in deer have found that young deer demonstrate precise spatial memory of their natal locations, returning to birth sites with remarkable accuracy even decades later, suggesting that the locations are encoded in memory with extraordinary specificity during the critical period of early development. The deer is not just remembering that she was born in a general area. The deer is remembering the specific place. The memory is geographic. The memory is precise. The memory is deep. Beyond the location itself, the deer remembers the particular sensory signature of the place where she was born. The scent of the location, the specific smell of the vegetation, the soil, the shelter, the particular scents that characterized her first days of life, the maternal scent, the scent of safety. The sounds of the location, the particular acoustic signature of the birthplace, the sounds of the thicket or tree canopy, the sounds of the water source if one was nearby, the sounds that accompanied the first days of conscious perception. The light quality of the location, the particular way light filtered through the sheltering vegetation, the brightness or dimness of the natal shelter, the specific lighting that characterized safety. The vegetation pattern, the particular arrangement of plants, shrubs, trees, the specific landscape composition of the birthplace. All of these sensory details are encoded in the fawn's developing brain. All of these details create a multisensory memory that is far richer and more detailed than simple visual recognition. When the deer returns to her birthplace decades later, she is not just recognizing the visual appearance of the location. She is recognizing the entire sensory signature. She is smelling the place as familiar. She is hearing it as familiar. She is experiencing it as the sensory world of her birth. Researchers studying olfactory and spatial memory in animals have found that scent-based memories of locations are remarkably persistent, with animals demonstrating recognition of natal locations based primarily on olfactory information even after decades of separation, suggesting that scent is a primary sensory basis for birthplace memory. The sensory memory runs deep. The smell and sound and light of the birthplace are filed in the deer's memory in a way that makes the location unmistakable when she returns. When the fawn is young, the mother is teaching. The mother is showing the fawn where water is located. The mother is showing the fawn where food is abundant. The mother is showing the fawn which locations are safe and which locations are dangerous. And in doing this teaching, the mother is reinforcing the fawn's memory of the natal location as significant. The mother is communicating through her behavior that this location, this birthplace, is important. The mother returns to the birthplace regularly. The mother treats the birthplace with particular attention and care. The mother's behavior signals to the fawn, this place matters. This place is home. The fawn is learning not just to remember the location, but to value the location. The fawn is learning that the birthplace has particular significance. The fawn is being taught that this is a place to return to. This maternal teaching is encoding into the fawn's memory something beyond simple geography. The maternal teaching is encoding significance. The maternal teaching is teaching the meaning of home. Researchers studying maternal filial bonding in deer have found that mothers demonstrate selective return behaviors to natal locations, repeatedly visiting the birth site during the first years of their offspring's lives, suggesting that the mother's own fidelity to natal locations may influence offspring learning and memory encoding. The mother is teaching the fawn that the birthplace is home. The fawn is learning this lesson at the most fundamental level. The fawn is encoding it into memory through maternal teaching and maternal example. As the young deer moves through her early life, she is building a detailed cognitive map of the natal location. This is not a two-dimensional map like a human might make. This is a three-dimensional, multisensory, deeply encoded spatial memory. The deer knows the topography of the birthplace, the elevation changes, the water sources, the vegetation densities, the shelter locations. The deer knows the pathways through the birthplace, the routes between significant locations, the escape routes from various parts of the territory, the efficient paths for moving through the space. The deer knows the resource locations within and around the birthplace, where the best foraging is, where water can be reliably found, where shelter can be reliably located. This cognitive map is not built through explicit teaching, but through the repetitive experience of living in and moving through the natal location during the critical developmental period. As the fawn becomes mobile and independent, she is repeatedly navigating this space. Each navigation reinforces the spatial memory. Each experience in the location adds detail to the cognitive map. By the time the young deer disperses, leaving the natal area to establish her own territory, she has encoded a remarkably detailed and accurate cognitive map of the birthplace. Researchers studying spatial cognition in prey animals have found that young animals develop highly detailed mental maps of their natal areas, encoding not just the visual appearance but the spatial relationships, resource locations, and refuge locations with remarkable precision, suggesting that spatial mapping is a fundamental cognitive capability developed during early life. The spatial map is permanent. The map is detailed. The map remains accessible even after decades of separation from the location. Despite years of living elsewhere, despite establishing her own territory, despite living in completely different locations, the deer carries the memory of her birthplace with her. The memory is not active constantly. The memory is not consciously accessed on a daily basis, but the memory is present. The memory is stored. The memory is accessible. The memory of the birthplace is a kind of permanent reference point in the deer's cognitive world. No matter where she is, no matter what territory she occupies, the birthplace memory remains. And this memory shapes the deer's relationship to home and place throughout her life. Some researchers speculate that the persistence of natal site memory may provide a psychological anchor for the animal, a permanent reference point of safety and significance that persists even as the animal moves through life and territory. The memory may also influence the deer's choice of where to give birth to her own fawns. Some deer show a tendency to give birth to their offspring in locations similar to their own birthplace, suggesting that the natal site memory influences the selection of birthing locations. In some cases, if the deer's own territory becomes unsafe or untenable, the memory of the birthplace may draw the deer back. The birthplace becomes a refuge. The remembered location becomes a destination. Researchers studying long-term spatial memory in animals have found that birthplace memories appear to persist for the entire lifespan of the individual, with old deer sometimes shifting their territorial preferences toward natal locations later in life, suggesting that natal site memory may become increasingly influential as the animal ages. The memory is permanent, the memory is carried, the memory shapes the life. This is the revelation that explains the neurobiological basis of natal site fidelity. And it is the moment when you understand that the memory of the birthplace is not just behavioral, but is literally written into the structure of the deer's brain. When a young animal is born, her brain is in a state of extraordinary plasticity. The neural pathways are being formed through experience. The brain is being shaped by the environment. The neural networks that process memory are being established. When a fawn is born and spends her first weeks and months in the natal location, her developing brain is being shaped by that environment. The sensory input from the birthplace is creating neural pathways. The spatial information from the birthplace is being encoded in the hippocampus and related memory centers. The emotional associations with the birthplace, the maternal safety, the early comfort, are being encoded in the limbic system. The repeated exposure to the birthplace during this critical developmental window is literally building neural structures dedicated to the memory of this specific place. By the time the fawn grows into adulthood and disperses, her brain has been permanently structured by the experience of being born and raised in the natal location. The birthplace is not just a memory. The birthplace has shaped the physical structure of the brain itself. This structural shaping explains why the memory of the birthplace is so persistent and so powerful. The memory is not just stored information. The memory is encoded into the fundamental architecture of the animal's brain. When the deer returns to her birthplace decades later, she is not just accessing a stored memory. She is activating neural structures that were formed and shaped during her most foundational period of development. The return to the birthplace activates these deep neural structures. Researchers studying experience-dependent neural plasticity in animals have found that early developmental experiences, particularly experiences during critical periods, result in measurable physical changes in brain structure, with certain regions of the brain showing lasting enlargement or increased connectivity based on early environmental experience, suggesting that development in a particular location physically shapes the animal's brain. The birthplace is written into her brain. The birthplace is not forgotten because it is encoded not just as memory but as brain structure itself. In many cases, the doe will not only return to her birthplace but will include her birthplace in her home range as an adult. She will have her own fawns, and she will bring those fawns back to the location where she herself was born. This creates a multi-generational pattern. The grandmother's birthplace becomes the mother's regular location. The mother's location becomes the fawn's birthplace. The knowledge of the significant location is being transmitted across generations. The location is being reinforced through repeated visitation. The location is becoming an anchor point not just for one individual deer, but for a lineage of deer. Over generations, the location can become a kind of ancestral home, a place that multiple generations of deer return to, that multiple generations remember, that becomes significant in the family's identity. Some locations develop particular populations of deer that show remarkable fidelity to returning to that location across many decades. These populations are often the result of this multi-generational transmission of natal site memory. The mother's own fidelity to the natal location influences the fawn's development. The young deer is exposed to the mother's regular returns to the birthplace. The young deer learns through maternal example that this location is significant. The young deer's own memory of the location is reinforced through repeated visitation. In this way, the natal location becomes a multi-generational anchor point. The location becomes a home place for the entire family line. Researchers studying cultural transmission in animals have found that natal site fidelity patterns often persist across multiple generations within family groups. With daughters of philopatric females, females who remain in or return to their natal area, showing significantly higher rates of natal site fidelity than females whose mothers dispersed, suggesting that the mother's own fidelity to natal locations influences offspring learning and behavior. The knowledge passes down, the location becomes ancestral, the home is preserved through generations. And this is the revelation that will make you understand what natal site fidelity truly means. When a deer returns to the yard where she was born decades later, she is not just returning to a location. She is coming home. Home is not metaphorical for a deer. Home is not abstract. Home is a specific place. Home is the place where she was born. Home is the place where she is most fundamentally known. When a deer has lived decades away from her birthplace, she has experienced much. She has established territories. She has raised offspring. She has survived predation, illness, injury. She has moved through many different landscapes. But the birthplace is different from all other places. The birthplace is the original location. The birthplace is where her story began. The birthplace is encoded in her brain at the deepest level. And when the doe returns to her birthplace, whether it is because her current territory is no longer tenable, or because the pull of the natal site is simply too strong, or because of the multi-generational inheritance of location-specific memory, the return is profound. The doe recognizes the place. She knows it immediately. Her body relaxes into the familiar location. Her behavior changes. The heightened vigilance of a stranger in a new place is gone. The calm familiarity of being home replaces it. This is not just a behavioral preference for a familiar location. This is a homecoming. For a deer, home is not the herd. Home is not the companions. Home is the place, the specific place where she was born, the place that is encoded in her memory, the place that is written into the structure of her brain. A deer that has spent decades living elsewhere, that has established her own territories, that has created her own life in other locations, is still capable of coming home. And when she returns to the yard where she was born, after decades of separation, the return is powerful. This is a story about memory. This is a story about place. This is a story about what it means to be connected to a location so deeply that the connection persists across decades. This is a story about a wild animal knowing where home is, and being willing to return to home across the span of a lifetime. The deer never forgets the yard where she was born. The yard is always, in some fundamental way, home. And if a deer has returned to your yard despite the passing of years, despite the changes in the landscape, despite the distance she has traveled, she is coming home. She is returning to the place where her life began. She is remembering. She is coming home. Before I go, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer in the comments below. Do you have a deer that returns to your yard seemingly out of nowhere? Do you suspect that the deer was born in your yard and is returning across the years? Have you noticed the particular calm or familiarity with which the deer behaves in your location? Tell me about it. What makes you think this deer was born there? How long has the pattern of return been occurring? Have you noticed the deer recognizing landmarks or moving through the yard with particular knowledge? The stories this hidden backyard wildlife community shares are some of the most extraordinary I read every week. And every single one of them matters, because every single one of them is a story about the presence of memory in wild animals, about the persistence of connection to place, about the meaning of home. If anything in this video changed the way you understand the deer that visits your yard, if it changed what you will see the next time a deer arrives at your location, share it with someone who would understand. Sometimes the right perspective at the right moment changes not just what we notice, but how we move through the world. Thank you for being here at Hidden Backyard Wildlife. The next time you see a deer in your yard, consider the possibility that this deer might be coming home. Consider that decades might separate her from her birthplace. Consider that she has traveled far and lived long, and now she is back. She is home. She remembers. And the place where you live might be the home she has been remembering her entire life. That is not a small thing. I will see you in the next one.